Welcome to Restricted Views. Welcome to Restricted Views. Here we are once again. Not the best of circumstances. I would like to return to Restricted Views on a high note, but as it is today, we are the 17th of November. Early on this afternoon, the news broke that the Premier League Commission had come to a decision regarding Everton's FFP case. And the ruling was released that Everton have been hit with a massive 10-point deduction in the Premier League by the Premier League's Commission. So it's a 10-point deduction which is effective immediately. 10 points come off Everton's total. We are now languishing in the relegation zone with that 10-point deduction. And I think the whole football world is absolutely shocked. I've watched a little bit of TalkSport this afternoon. I've been looking at some reactions on social media, and I think not just Evertonians but all football fans are absolutely gobsmacked. The severity of the punishment, not just the ruling Everton were guilty, but the severity of the punishment being 10 points, the biggest point deduction in all of Premier League history. What we'll do, we'll try to unpack all of this in today's show. We're live on YouTube. This will also be going out on YouTube. If you do join on, please do put some comments as you watch along on YouTube. And we're going to have a 10-second break, and we'll be right back. First and foremost. So I'll just simply read it out and make some comments as we go along. Everton Football Club is both shocked and disappointed by the ruling of the Premier League Commission. The club believes that the Commission has imposed a wholly disproportionate and unjust sporting sanction. Big words from Everton this afternoon. A wholly disproportionate and unjust sporting sanction, which I think has been echoed by every single person that I've spoken to. Everyone that I've listened to on radio has agreed. The club has already communicated its intention to appeal the decision to the Premier League, which is fair enough. The appeal process will now commence, and the club's case will be heard by an appeal board appointed to the Premier League's rules in due course. Alan Myers on Twitter has already said that this will likely be sometime before the end of the season. So I would imagine the appeal will be heard and the case will be put forward for some time before the end of this particular Premier League season. If the audio is okay, please do let me know on YouTube. Drop me a comment down below. That'd help me out very much. Thank you very much. Everton maintains that it has been open and transparent in the information it has provided to the Premier League, and that it has always respected the integrity of the process. We'll dive a little bit more into that in a few minutes once we look at the full report. The club does not recognise the finding that it failed to act with the utmost good faith, and it does not understand this to have been an allegation made by the Premier League during the course of proceedings. Both the harshness and severity of the sanction imposed by the Commission are neither a fair nor a reasonable reflection of the evidence submitted. Again, we'll go through that as we head into the full report shortly. The club will also monitor with great interest the decisions made in any other cases concerning the Premier League's profit and sustainability rules. Of course, Everton are talking about Chelsea and Manchester City, both with massive answers to put towards not just the Premier League, but to all the football. Now we've had this one sanction, Everton being hit by 10 points by the Independent Commission. What will Manchester City get, who have got 115 allegations against them? They seem to be wrapping their case around solely in red tape. Maybe it's the smart thing to do, considering Everton seem to have followed by the rules in terms of everything that's asked of us, in terms of coming to a hearing, providing evidence, cooperative working with the Premier League. It doesn't seem to have paid off in our favour. Everton cannot comment on this matter any further until the appeal process has concluded. And then also there was this video posted along with the article.
Myself and everybody at the club are shocked and disappointed by the ruling of the Premier League Commission. We believe the sanction is disproportionate and wholly unjust. The club's view
temporary
is that
CEO.
The harshness and severity of this punishment are neither a fair nor a reasonable reflection of the evidence that was submitted to the Commission. For that reason, the club intends to appeal the outcome before the Premier League Appeals Board. This is a sporting sanction that directly impacts supporters. The club and our players and staff and our fans will stick together in the face of what the club believes to be an unprecedented and disproportionate sanction. As we enter the next phase of this legal process, there is no further comment we can or will make, but rest assured, we will be standing up for Evertonians and our great club.
So, massive words there from Colin Chong, temporary CEO of Everton Football Club. I think one thing we have to take away from that is it is a legal process, and when Colin says he's not, Everton won't be making a further statement on the matter, fans can get very frustrated by the lack of noise coming out of Everton in an official capacity. We have to remember that the club probably won't make another statement now, other than what Colin's just put out and Everton have put out this afternoon, until the duration of the legal process has been concluded, and that includes an appeal. So it's really important that we, as a fan base, stick together, don't get into the club again. I mean, I think personally, what has happened has happened. We can't continually be beating the club up about it now. I'm sure we all want to and we all feel like that, but essentially what is that going to achieve right now? I don't think too much. So I know for one thing, Evertonians will get behind the team. They will get behind the team at Goodison Park, and Sean Dyche will have the full support of every single Evertonian in terms of noise, banners, maybe even meets before the game. He will have a full support of Evertonians as we head in to the remaining games of the Premier League season. Moving over to the Premier League statement here, it's a short statement they put out on their website earlier on today, and it reads: an independent commission has imposed an immediate deduction of 10 points on Everton FC for a breach of the Premier League's profitability and sustainability rules, PSRs. The Premier League issued a complaint against the club and referred the case to an independent commission earlier this year. During the proceedings, the club admitted it was in breach of the PSRs for the period ending season 2021 and 22, but the extent of the breach remained in dispute. Following a 5-day hearing last month, the Commission determined that Everton FC's PSR calculation for the relevant period resulted in a loss of £124.5 million, as contended by the Premier League, which exceeded the threshold of £105 million permitted under the PSRs. The Commission concluded that a sporting sanction in the form of a 10-point deduction should be imposed. That sanction has immediate effect. And of course, it then goes on to say the full Independent Commission's reasons and report are attached to the website, and we will dive into them in a little bit more detail. Let's open that up and have a look then. So it's a huge report that's online. It's a 41-page report from the Premier League or the Independent Commission. it looks like the commission was made up of Mr. David Phillips, His Honour Alan Greenwood, and Mr. Nick Igo. So the commission was held between the 16th and the 20th of October, between the Premier League and Everton Football Club. Like I say, the thing's massive and it goes into great detail. I think we'll just look at it and pick out a few moments and a few things we really want to read into a bit more, because I'm not going to sit here and read the whole 41 pages at the moment. But the introduction, it says the complaint of the Premier League is that alleges Everton FC is in breach of profitability and sustainability rules, which is what the whole reason for the case in the hearing. The Premier League's case is that a proper PSR calculation for the season 2021-2022 demonstrate losses of 124.5 million. That exceeds the sum of 105 million permitted by the rules. They go over Everton. Premier League claim Everton have gone over by £19.5 million. Everton accepts that it is in breach of the PSR, so that's massive. Everton actually are not fighting this case saying we are innocent, we haven't breached the rules. They're saying we have breached the rules, but they're mitigating circumstances why we have done so. So let's look into that as well. By the conclusion of the hearing, it argued that properly calculated, the breach was 9.7 million from Everton. Further, Everton advances factual material that asserts mitigates the gravity of the breaches. So again, it goes into a bit more detail, a little bit more legal mumbo jumbo. Some people who are involved, brief details of some, but not all of the individuals and organisations who are referred to in this decision or in the documents of the hearing bundle. So we had Carlo Ancelotti, of course, manager during that time, Denise Barrett-Baxendale, Chief Executive Officer during that time as well, Marcel Brands, Everton's Director of Football, and then a whole host of other people, including Colin Chong, Everton Stadium Development Limited, Jonathan Brown, expert witness for the Premier League, Katie Charles, Everton's Director of Legal Services, Ross Christie, Premier League's Chief Financial Officer since 2019, witness for the Premier League as well. David Harrison, Everton's Director of Football Operations and Club Secretary since until March 2023. Jamie Herbert, Grant Eagles, Ben Johnson, William Kenwright, among others, and the list goes on and on and on, including Alisher Usmanov and Richarlison, who is comes up in the report as well. So, profit and sustainability, it goes on to discuss what exactly is profit and sustainability. We understand what that is. A club can make no greater loss than 105 million between a period of time, and that is what Everton have breached. There's a section about COVID-19 in terms of the impact of COVID-19 on the Premier League season, the allowances that were made for COVID-19, and it details a little bit of that as well. Some of the facts that were stated here. Mr. Moshiri first acquired a beneficial interest in Everton in March 2016. By September 2018, he had acquired a beneficial interest in the majority of Everton's share of capital. Since January 2022, he's been the beneficial owner of more than 90% of the share capital. Mr. Moshiri came to Everton with great aspirations. I'm sure he did. He wanted to transform the club into one of the top teams in the Premier League, regularly playing in Europe. We know that didn't happen, as he wished to provide the club with a new state-of-the-art stadium. No other Premier League club had carried out two such projects at the same time, as detailed in this report. And it was a challenging plan. Mr. Moshiri intended to improve the squad by spending a substantial amount of money in the first 3 or 4 years of ownership. They say this like it was an actual plan. It was a thought-out plan, and it wasn't just throwing things as it happened, which I believe that's what actually happened. The investment in players will be realised in 2 ways. First, the enhanced squad would result in Everton being in the top quarter of the Premier League and playing in Europe. Both would produce increased revenue. Second, having improved the squad, future player acquisitions would be funded partly from the increased revenue and partly from making player sales. The plan was that once this strategy had been put in place, there would be little or no need to rely on funding from the owner. So it looks like Mr. Moshiri wanted to create a sustainable Everton Football Club. didn't happen, obviously hasn't happened. It's very difficult to be sustainable in the Premier League at any given time. But Mr. Moshiri has obviously put across the ideology that he was Everton was going to be sustainable in the long term. The plan required that a substantial amount of money is spent in the first 3 to 4 years of new ownership, which is what happened. It was, he said, all part of a normal investment cycle in a football club following a change of ownership. The provision of a new stadium was as much as a priority to Mr. Moshiri as was rebuilding the squad. Everton embarked on a demanding project, namely the construction of a new stadium at Bramley-Moore Dock. It set up a wholly owned subsidiary, Everton Stadium Development Limited, to carry out the development. The cost of the project was considerable and is now estimated to total 760 million. Everton Stadium Development Limited had no income and was wholly dependent upon funds from Everton to enable it to carry out the development. When Mr. Moshiri had first acquired an interest in Everton, he had enabled it to pay off its external debt, a total of £55 million. Everton's plan was that part of the cost of the stadium would be funded by Mr. Moshiri, but that the majority of the cost would be funded by third-party debt. That third-party debt, referred to as a senior debt, was intended to fund the stadium for the next 30 years. Until such senior debt could be obtained, Everton continued to fund the stadium development by means of an intercompany loan to Everton Stadium Development Limited. Everton's debt liability was to two distinct sources, Mr. Moshiri and third-party commercial lenders. Mr. Moshiri made payments to Everton by the way of interest-free loans, some of which were subsequently converted into shares. Mr. Moshiri's investment now totals circa £750 million. Everton also obtained commercial loans. Following the introduction of the government's coronavirus large business interruption loan scheme, in June 2020, Everton applied to Metro Bank plc for a loan. The application contained the following statement, and it goes on to read, a lot of that detail. As we skip through this was really just setting the plan of what Mr. Moshiri was looking to do when he bought Everton Football Club: invest in the squad, build a new stadium, and hopefully have a sustainable Everton going forward for the long term. None of which happened. This is a key part, really. In October 2019, Everton produced a sustainable business plan. The plan projected that the club would regularly finish in the top 8 clubs of the Premier League, and that the new stadium would be constructed. It recognised the significant recent expenditure on players, but projected both a reduced need to purchase new players coupled with revenue generated from the sale of existing players. This is what Mr. Moshiri described as being the normal investment cycle. By early 2019, Everton identified what it regarded as an anomaly in the treatment of the expenditure of the stadium. The nature of Everton's stadium development project, given its location on Bramley-Moore Dock, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, meant that a significant investment was made before planning permission was granted. So again, a little bit more about the stadium, blah-de-blah-de-blah. In October 2019, Everton engaged the Premier League in discussions about what it considered to be capitalisation anomaly. The Premier League at that stage declined to permit the stadium expenditure to be excluded from the PSR calculation. This was probably one of the details of the report. Everton continued to address the concerns about the PSR calculation. On 20th February 2020, Mrs. Barrett Baxendale wrote to the Premier League requesting that Everton's reporting perimeter should be changed to exclude Everton Stadium Development Limited. On 13th of March 2020, Mr. Brands produced the club's 2020 player trading strategy, which envisaged selling or releasing 12 existing players and purchasing 4 new players in the summer 2020 transfer window. In Everton's financial year 2022 PSR calculation, it stated that if 8 of the aforementioned 12 identified players had been sold during the summer 2020 transfer window, Everton would have received transfer fees of £83.2 million, producing a net profit on disposal of £49.9 million. These seem just like figures just thrown out there, don't they? Resulting in an overall profit cost saving of £87.7 million once financial year 2021 amortization and wages had been taken into account. During late 2020 and early 2021, Everton made further approaches to the Premier League about the capitalisation of stadium expenses and anomaly. On the 5th of January 2021, Mrs Barrett Baxendale gave a presentation to the Premier League board that included the new stadium project update. In that update, Everton stated that the club had invested a circa £54 million and that could not be capitalised because of the lack of planning permission. It stated that Mr Mashiri's investments into the club, through the shareholder loan, had funded these development costs. Without this commitment from Mr Mashiri, it is unlikely the club could have financed this development from its ongoing revenue sources. It goes on to say 2021, Everton Premier League produced a report to its board on Everton's expenditure. It noticed that while Everton was forecast to breach the PSR maximum of £105 million, it would not do so if the stadium expenditure were to be excluded. It contrasted Everton's position with that of other six clubs who are being able to capitalise expenditure on stadium development, principally because their developments could be considered probable and early stage of the respective projects. The report recommended that the Premier League should negotiate an agreed sanction with Everton for the PSR breaches, that sanction to reflect the anomaly identified by the club. It goes on to say how we gained planning permission and we started the stadium's build, and it goes into a whole host of stadium detail. But one key part of the report is about Player X, and it's detailed as Player X in the report. And it goes on, this paragraph, to state the following. Everton had signed Player X in 2017. So we now know Player X, from common sense, is Gylfi Sigurdsson. Player X had proved to be a star player for the club. In July 2021, Player X was arrested. The FA suspended Player X from all football activity, making it impossible for him to perform his contractual duties. Of course, he was stood down effectively, wasn't he? He didn't play or train for Everton during that time. On 23rd of August 2021, Everton dismissed Player X. Everton sought advice on the possibility of suing Player X for breach of contract, but elected not to do so. So this point was Everton was going to wanted to mitigate money here about Player X, Gylfi Sigurdsson. They said they're going to sue him, but they didn't due to compassionate reasons, and it would have affected Gylfi Sigurdsson's mental health during that time. And they claim they should have been given some recognition for that, and also being able to mitigate a substantial amount of money for Gylfi Sigurdsson, because he could have been sold, he could have played during that time, and our performance could have been improved. We wouldn't have had to replace Gylfi Sigurdsson. That means there would have been less transfer spend, and also we could have sold Gylfi Sigurdsson during any point during that time, and that would have resulted in obviously income to Everton Football Club, and would have made us sustainable and within the boundary of PSR during that time. By early 2022, the report says, it was clear to Everton that even allowing for the concessions made in the 2021 agreement, meeting its PSR calculation target would be a challenge. The club's performance on the pitch had fallen short of what had been planned. Again, remember during Everton's strategy plan, they had Everton competing in the top 8 of clubs consistently by this point. With a reduction in merit fee of £2.1 million for each final place in the Premier League. Again, a huge substantial. We were due to finish, I think, projected to finish in the top 8. We actually finished 16th. So there was a huge amount of money there lost, which again has gone against us on PSR. Everton considered the loss of Player X to be a cause of the poor performance, as I just mentioned. Other players had suffered injuries. I guess probably just going on to mitigate why we were so rubbish during that time. The knowledge that Everton was facing PSR calculation challenges caused potential purchases for the players to drive a hard bargain. Everton considered the sale that the sale on 30th of June 2022 of Mr. Richarlison to Tottenham Hotspur FC for the sum of 60 million, rather than the sum of 80 million that it had budgeted to receive, to be directly attributable to its PSR calculation difficulties. So again, basically Everton is saying, just due to our poor performance, due to it's wider known that we had PSR calculation challenges, that we didn't get £80 million for Richarlison, and we only got 60. Excuse me. Now, that's an interesting argument. You could say we didn't get £80 million because Tottenham knew we were in the shitter and we needed money. That's a fair argument to make. But it's also a fair argument that we just didn't negotiate well with Tottenham. We know Daniel Levy from Tottenham is a shrewd businessman, and he absolutely takes the pants down of his opponents in the boardroom. It looks like that's what's happened to Everton Football Club here. We had a budget of 80 million and we fell short of that by 20. Now, it doesn't go into detail the exact transfer and the fees and the breakdown and if there's add-on fees and what we might get. It doesn't say if that 60 million was a fully secured 60 million or if that is made up of performance added bonuses, and we mightn't even get to 60 million if that is the actual case, because Richarlison's performance has been poor for Tottenham Hotspur so far. But no doubt that made a huge it was hugely attributable to the PSR calculation difficulties, as Everton stated in this report. Everton also goes on, this is really important as well, that USM Service Limited, USM obviously a company owned by Alza Usmanov, Everton said that it'd be in the process of negotiating a stadium naming rights agreement with USM, which would have generated 10 million per annum for a period of 20 years. So we're talking about a 200 million pound name and rights deal that was going to be at Bramley Moor. So Bramley Moor was going to be the USM Arena, USM Stadium, but it would have netted Everton £200 million, which is a huge amount of money. But Everton were obliged to withdraw from the negotiations following the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the imposition of sanctions by the UK government on Russian companies and individuals. So Everton are basically saying, okay, there was the Russia/Ukraine war. We pulled out. We did the right thing. We stopped liaising with USM and being a business partner. But it's cost us more, at least £200 million. And I would say more, given the fact that USM were Finch Farms official, the training grounds official sponsor. And there's a huge amount of money Everton left on the table there, and it hasn't really been taken into account, in my belief, in this report, that Everton lost that money. In February 2022, Everton decided to pass on the interest charges payable under the Rights and Media Funding Limited and Metro Bank PLC loans by levying interest on their intercompany loan to Everton Stadium Development Limited. A huge amount of the report is about Rights and Media Funding Limited and Metro Bank PLC loans as well, and how that affects Everton Stadium Development Limited. I won't delve into the detail there. I'm sure other people who do that for a living and are fully up to date with the ins and outs of the loans. But that's not something that I'll get myself tied up in at the moment. We head down. We go through 35, which is Everton submitted its audited accounts. Everton's PSR calculation at that time, which continued to exclude items it identified in March 2022, showed an adjusted loss of 87.1 million. That was significantly below the 105 million threshold. The Premier League rejected the additional excluded items, and on 24th of March 2023 began these very proceedings. So that was interesting. At the beginning of the Premier League bringing this claim to Everton and the charge, we had actually put our report in and said we are 87.1 million at a loss, way below the 105 million. And the Premier League have come back and said, no, you're not 87.1 million. You haven't lost that amount of money. You've actually lost near to 125 million. So go away and sort these accounts out. And by the way, we're charging you at the same time. The Premier League's complaint is a comparatively short document. It sets out the PSR regime and and the rules and Everton's PSR calculation for financial year 2022 should show a loss of 120.8 million. It rejected Everton's attempt to exclude the additional items first advanced in March 2022. So it's basically said that the Premier League has saw through Everton's bullshit basically and said it's not 87.1 million, it's 120.8. They've rejected the accounts. They've said we're going to charge you, and that this is what's brought on this whole case to be taken upon the Premier League's independent commission. It snowballed from this very case. Interesting as well, at the pre-trial review on the 4th of October 2023, both parties were given permission to amend their pleaded cases. In its amended answer, Everton admitted it had abandoned its claim to be entitled to many of the additional exclusions that it had advanced in its PSR calculation. So that basically means Everton have gone, on the pre-trial, 4th of October 2023, Everton have held their hands up and go, okay, we're not 80 odd million, we haven't lost that amount of money. We hold our hands up, we accept that we can't exclude all the things that we had been trying to exclude. We've reviewed it and we've actually come up with a new figure. And Everton at that point said, we have actually breached. We're not below, we've breached, and we admit that. And it was interesting that Everton have only admitted that on the 4th of October 2023. So then Everton at that point have said, we are in breach, and we're in breach by 7.9 million. So we're just above it. And they've held their hands up. But it further maintained that it was entitled to substantial mitigation. The Premier League challenged Everton's case in its amended reply. It rejected the claim entitlement to the additional exclusions, arguing instead that the reality was that they were aggravating factors. It actually, at that point, it put Everton's breach of the PSR threshold at 124 million. So the Premier League actually initially thought we were 120 million at loss. And then once Everton had looked at their revised claims, Premier League have come back, looked at Everton's claims and went, no, you're actually 124.5. So the amount has actually gone up by the Premier League by 4 million. As it goes in the complaints, the Premier League has asked for a quicker hearing so that the proceedings could be concluded before the end of the 2022-23 season. The application was determined at a Teams hearing, Microsoft Teams Online, on the 31st of March 2023. The Commission decided that it was unrealistic to expect these proceedings and any appeal to be determined in the current season, and that to compel Everton to attempt to meet such a timeline would run the risk of procedural unfairness. Conventional directions were agreed, with the substantive hearing to take place in the autumn of 2023. Which will permit any appeal to be heard and determined in the 2023-2024 season. Now, isn't that huge? The Premier League wanted Everton's hearing to be concluded before the end of the 2022-23 season. If that were to happen, if that was allowed by the appeals process, Everton would have been found guilty, as per today, the ruling. Everton have been found guilty. The 10-point sanction would have come in, and Everton would have been relegated at the end of the 2022-2023 season. So this is absolutely massive. If this appeal hearing was held, at the beginning of this year, Everton would now be playing in the Championship. In some way, have we got to look and thank our lucky stars that actually it was held at the beginning of the 2023-24 season? And if we have been deducted 10 points, and if that does stick, there's time to rectify it. There certainly wouldn't have been time at the end of last season. 10 points would have relegated us and would now be in the Championship. Interesting fact. In June 2023, both parties, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, it set out a date. It was going to be held in October, the report says. And as it is, we're on page 15 of the 41-page report. Anyway, it goes on. A lot of these, it goes into details of the planning stadium costs and the debate and the transfer levy. The third was player termination loss. Again, this comes back to Gylfi Sigurdsson. So Everton had dismissed player X by this point, Gylfi Sigurdsson, leaving available to it a claim against the former player for the losses of £10 million. However, it decided not to pursue that player for the losses associated with the players' welfare. It sought to exclude the sum of £10 million from its PSR calculation, so Everton was saying this is going to cost us £10 million. Gylfi Sigurdsson has cost £10 million that we're not going to go and claim against Gylfi Sigurdsson. We're just going to put our hands up and say, due to the fact that it's going to be a detriment to the players' welfare, we're just going to take the hit on that. We're going to have the £10 million loss, but we want to mitigate it from our PSR. The Premier League objected to the proposed exclusion, both on grounds of principle and uncertainty. Fourth was COVID, and then again, we go through all this other claims in a bit more detail. Everton's amended answer. Now, this is really interesting as well. Everton's first answer, it says here, in its original answer, Everton asserted that it was not in breach of PSR. So this is when Everton put out the statements as well to the fans to say, we've been charged by the Premier League. We don't agree. We'll look at it. We will robustly defend our position, and we assure fans that we will fight this charge. Initially, they did, but in the end, they've come to. In the end, they've actually turned around and said, "Well, you know what? We were in breach." And they put an amended answer in, and in fact, we were £112.9 million. The losses were £112.9 million, £7.9 million above the £105 million threshold. So Everton held hands up and said, okay, we're in breach for £7.9 million. I'm just wondering as well, and we won't get the answer to this, but if the Appeals Commission had said, okay, we agree with you, you are £7.9 million above the threshold, would it still have been a 10-point deduction? Where does the threshold come in? We'll move on to that in a little bit. In addition to challenging the extent of the breach of the PSR, Everton advances 6 factors that, although not reducing the extent of the breach, are said to mitigate it. Those factors, Everton argues, are directly relevant to the nature and size of the sanction that the Commission should impose. We summarise those factors. 1. Everton could have treated stadium post-planning interest charges of £9.3 million as capital expenditure, in which case it would have reduced its loss before tax by that amount. Although it is now too late to do so, that is a mitigating factor. Number 2, the player termination loss, although not one that can be excluded from the PSR calculation, it is a mitigating factor. That was player X again, which was Gylfi Sigurdsson. Number 3, COVID prevented Everton from selling players and to release amortisation and wage savings. Number 4, Everton had cooperated fully and proactively with the Premier League in relation to its PSR challenges. It's interesting that Everton have put, we've cooperated and we have not fought yet too much, and we've said, okay, we accept it and we will be cooperative, and Everton think that is commendable, and think the Premier League should have and the Commission should have taken that into account. Clearly, they have not. Number 5. Everton's PSR adjusted losses demonstrates a positive trend, showing that it had positively addressed its PSR obligations. So Everton are basically saying, we have made a loss over the period of time, but it's actually showed a positive trend. So the massive losses were probably at the beginning of that period, and it's gone down year on year. And number 6, the impact of the Russian invasion of Ukraine caused a significant and unexpected impact on Everton's investment and sponsorship income. So again, Everton are citing that £200 million that they've lost out on naming rights for Bramley Moordock. Everton concluded the introduction to the amended answer with the following statement. The club's alleged overspend arose, in short, from a combination of unforeseen circumstances, which frustrated prudent plans to reduce its losses. The Premier League has rightly accepted that losses incurred by the club in constructing the stadium are the result of applicable applicable accounting standards and reflect costs for which there was no sporting imperative in the circumstances, not least when other clubs had, in effect, been able to capitalise similar capital-related expenditure. In those circumstances, there should be no question of a sporting sanction. The club has always been and remains committed to operating sustainably and in accordance with the Premier League's rules. The Premier League then come back and said the Premier League pointed out that it had insufficient time to set out its case in response to Everton's amended answer, and that what it pleaded in its amended reply was no more than a summary that it would develop in its skeleton argument and at the hearing. The issues taken with Everton's case were, however, clear. Stadium interest. The Premier League advances three arguments on this basis. First, relying on the wording of the August 2021 agreement, it argues that any cost incurred in the financial year in which planning permission was attained cannot be excluded from the PSR calculation. That goes back, way, way back. You remember me saying earlier on that Denise Baxendale actually wanted that removed from Everton's PSR, and she'd wrote to the Premier League in 2020, I believe it was. The Premier League is standing firm and saying, no, it cannot be excluded from PSR calculation. It goes on to discuss more about the transfer levy, which we haven't gone into in detail. The player termination, Gylfi Sigurdsson termination. The Premier League say Everton cannot show that the alleged loss was in fact due or recoverable. This, therefore, cannot stand as mitigation. So they're basically saying, Premier League is saying, there's no evidence that you were going to sell that player. There's no evidence that you were going to get the money back for that player. So we're not taking it into account. So Everton have put their case together, and the Premier League have put their case forward. And it's now for the Commission to look at both arguments and to come up with which side of the fence that they sit on, and again to find out if any party is guilty. So each party put together a list of issues, but they've not actually been able to agree a common list. They've both got different things on their lists, and that may be because of Everton's amended reply, which the Premier League didn't have time to reply to. The first issue is to quantify the extent of Everton's breach, the amount by which PSR calculation for financial year 2022 exceeded the figure of 105 million. The second issue is to determine the principles that should be applied when determining the appropriate sanction. That involves determining the purpose and approach to sanctioning, amongst other things, whether the structured formula advanced by the Premier League should be adopted. And the third issue, well, there's more than three. The third issue is to determine the character of the facts that are capable of constituting aggravation, blah, 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 blah. The fourth issue is the application of the principles relating to aggravation to the facts relied on. In other words, the Commission must determine which of the matters advanced by the Premier League as constituting aggravation in fact stands as aggravating matters. A lot of legal mumbo-jumbo. The fifth and sixth issues require a similar exercise to be carried out in relation to matters put forward by Everton as constituting mitigation. The fifth issue concerns the principles to be applied to the evolution of what Everton advances as mitigating matters. And it goes on and on and on and on. A couple of things that I took of this as we draw towards the end of the document. The Commission went through these points point by point, and they actually founded, they decided to lie with the Premier League on their case, on their basis, on their arguments, and not with Everton. What was interesting, and we'll touch upon it here, was, again, Gylfi Sigurdsson are coming to this quite considerably. Let's get to this point. It says something about Everton's midfield. Let's take a look. It must be in the conclusion. So, the conclusions. On the 1st of November 2023, the Commission received a joint statement from Mr. Johnson and Mr. Good addressing the double counting issue raised by the Commission during the course of the hearing. The Commission is satisfied in its view of findings in relation to the issue of pre-planning stadium interest. The figures discussed in the joint stadium do not affect the quantification of the breach. In consequence of these findings set out above, it is that Everton's PSR calculation for financial year 2022 was a loss of 124.5 million, which amounts to an excess above the 105 million threshold of 19.5 million. So, as a conclusion, the Commission have heard all arguments and they've said, Everton, you have breached and you are £19.5 million over and above what you're allowed to lose, which is 105. That's the threshold, 105. We were at 124.5. Then goes on to say it looks at some of the sanction principles and the proposed formulas. On September 18, 2018, the EFL approved sanctioning guidelines for breaching of its P&S regime. So it's saying those guidelines presume that a sporting sanction is in the form of a points deduction is appropriate in all cases. The starting point is a sanction of 12 points that is reduced, potentially to 0, to reflect the quantum of the P&S breach and other mitigating factors. Reductions can be made if the losses show an improved trend. Now, Everton's do show an improved trend. Increases can be made in the event of aggravating features. Those guidelines, however, do not restrict a Commission's power to impose whatever sanction it considers appropriate. It was recognised in EFL versus Birmingham City that the guidelines do not have legal force and are not binding on a Commission. Blah, 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 goes on. The guidelines advocated by the Premier League are similar to, but different from, those of the EFL. As with EFL guidelines, they start with a presumption that the appropriate penalty will be a sporting sanction in the form of a deduction of points. They adopt a fixed starting point of a deduction of 6 points. There will be an increase from that starting point of 1 point for every 5 million, by which the club has exceeded the PSR threshold of 105 million. Further adjustments could be made to reflect aggravating or mitigating features. That's interesting. So, the Premier League adopt a starting point, adopt a position that a points deduction should always start with 6 points. Okay, so any breach should start with 6 points. 6 points, the Premier League are saying. So Everton had exceeded by... Okay, that's interesting. It's interesting. If you're like me and you're wondering how the Independent Commission has arrived at a 10-point deduction for Everton, it's in the actual report. Under point 87, the guidelines advocated by the Premier League are similar to but different to those of the EFL. So the EFL guidelines say they start with a presumption that the appropriate penalty will be a sporting sanction in the form of points. They adopt a fixed starting point of a deduction of 6 points. So no matter what, if you've breached the rules, there's a 6-point deduction waiting for you. There would then be an increase from that starting point of 1 point for every 5 million by which the club had exceeded the PSR threshold of 105 million. So it's right here in this text, right there. So if we say, okay, Everton have breached by 19.5 million, that means 6 points straight away. Then the Premier League are saying it should be another point for every 5 million by which the club has exceeded. So they've clearly rounded up from 19.5 million to 20 million. Now, if we divide 20 by 5, 20 million by 5 million, essentially, we get to 4 points. So there's the additional 4 points. So there's 6 points for breaching, and there's an additional 4 points for breaching by 20 million. If we breach by 5 million, it would have just been 1 additional point. If we breach by 10 million, it would have been 2 additional points. But the fact that we've breached by nearly £20 million, the Commission have then put another 4 points onto our sanction. So 6 points for just breaching FFP, and then 4 points for being £20 million over. That gives Everton the 10-point deduction that they currently face in the Premier League. So then the Commission have clearly, on that basis, deducted Everton's 10 points and said, okay, we will go from this guideline. Nevertheless, Everton do intend to appeal to the Independent Commission's decision, and we'll see how that goes. Actually, it goes on to say the Commission recognises the attraction of a regulator imposing a structured formula that was required to be applied in breaches of a particular regulation. Such a structured formula would inform clubs of the consequences of PSR breaches, although that would deny the Commission the power as a specialised tribunal. Nevertheless, the Commission is concerned that the adoption of it by a structured formula such as is advocated by the Premier League will be inconsistent with the unrestricted powers. We consider that it is not for the Commission to introduce such a structured formula, even on a case-by-case basis. So the Commission has actually rejected the Premier League's formula. We consider that we are required by the rules to hear and consider the mitigation, after which we have a wide discretion to impose any of the sanctions listed. If the Premier League wishes to impose a mandatory structured formula on a Commission dealing with PSR breaches, it can do so. In that event, the Commission will be required to comply within those rules. But as things stand, that has not been done. The Commission has the wide discretion. Interesting. So the Commission is actually not taking the Premier League's rules, and the Premier League rules was actually a 10-point deduction if we were to follow their sanctions. But the Commission has said, well, we're not going to do that. But what we are going to do is give you a 10-point sanction. The Commission therefore declined to adopt the structured formula proposed by the Premier League, and they will determine the appropriate sanction according to all the circumstances of the case. Then it goes on to list the sanction principles. Which is, again, it's basically saying it will do what it finds to be appropriate. The first head is that of punishment. A breach of the PSR involves an overspend in excess of 105 million above the target. Is therefore at any level a serious breach. Apparently there was a case, Sheffield Wednesday FC versus the Football League Limited. A breach of the PSR will confer a sporting advantage on the defaulting club. Okay, we understand that. The other heads overlap with the head of punishment. The second head is second head, third head, fourth head. Everton did not dispute the purpose of a sanction or the principles to be applied. It concentrated its submissions on the practical application of those principles to the circumstances of this case, and the submissions that it made concerning aggravating and mitigating factors. We consider those in great detail below. Of course you do. Blah, 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 blah. You want to punish the club. We will not be swayed by sympathy, for example. The fact that the penalty might make the prospect of relegation further. So the Commission have said, we're going to sanction you, and we don't care if this sanction will mean you will be relegated from the Premier League. We have no sympathy. We will not be swayed by sympathy. And the Commission said, we agree with the Premier League that any PSR breach involves a significant overspend. So even if you're over by 1 pence, it's basically saying you're going to get punished. Manish, thank you very much, my friend. Don't worry, mate, Everton will be fine. The other teams are shite. I agree. Okay, we'll carry on. So this is how the Commission are coming to the conclusion of how they are going to come up with the sanction, what they're going to be doing, how they're going to be putting that sanction upon Everton, and how many points it's going to be. Let's just have a look. The Commission recognised that one of its purposes of a sanction is to provide a deterrent effect. This is interesting as well, because they're basically saying we want this to be a deterrent for other clubs. So we will punish Everton today so other clubs do not reoffend. This is a legitimate purpose of the sanction. That would not, however, justify the imposition of a penalty that was disproportionate to the extent of the wrongdoing in any individual case. So they're basically saying both things. They're saying, well, we are going to punish you and we want it to be a deterrent, but we're not going to give you it just because of that. It doesn't really make sense. Mitigating factors of the sanction principles. The Premier League has advanced a number of factors that says increase Everton's culpability. Everton has advanced a number of factors that says reduces its culpability. So then they had to. The Premier League advances 4 separate factors. It says aggravate Everton's default position. Again, lot of data here, a lot of things to read through. But the fact that again they put forward their arguments that due to the Ukraine war we lost £200 million, due to Gylfi Sigurdsson, being arrested at that point and he couldn't pay for the club, that had a detrimental effect to Everton's Premier League standing. They couldn't sell Gylfi Sigurdsson. They decided not to take legal action against Gylfi Sigurdsson. All these were mitigating factors for Everton. As it goes, there's a section here 131 under transparency and cooperation with the Premier League. Everton asserts that it's behaved openly and responsibly in its dealings with the Premier League and in relation to its PSR challenges, and that behaviour should stand to its credit. The Commission recognises that Everton engaged extensively with the Premier League in relation to the problems caused by the inability to capitalise pre-planning permission expenditure. That approach was, of course, in Everton's self-interest. Further, as already discussed, the information provided by Everton about the source of the stadium funds and the consequent claim to exclude interest were not wholly straightforward. And it goes on again, we do not consider that there is any feature of Everton's dealings with the Premier League that is of such an exceptional nature that it should stand as mitigation of Everton's culpability. So they're saying, Everton, you did work with us. Yeah, thanks for that. But you haven't gone over and beyond, and the fact that you were you had a charge in the first place basically meant you had to comply with the Premier League. So we're not going to take that into account in terms of the sanction. The Commission have actually taken a really, really hard line in the report. They're just knocking back everything Everton have put in there. Everton are saying, we've done this, we've done that. They're knocking it back and they're signing with the Premier League on every single point. The Premier League submits that the only proper sanction is a sporting sanction in the form of a deduction of points. So the Premier League are pushing hard to deduct Everton of points. The Premier League argues that only a points deduction will meet the requirements of the principles that we have discussed above. The Premier League relies on the decision in a previous case. A sporting advantage is to be inferred so that anything other than a points deduction would be simply inappropriate. So the Premier League didn't want to fine Everton. They wanted a points deduction. The Premier League want Everton to lose the maximum amount of points possible. Everton disagreed with that, and of course, we would. It submits that a financial penalty would meet the justice of the case. If some form of sporting sanction is required, the Commission should consider imposing a transfer ban. So that's really interesting as well. Everton have said, a points sanction would not be appropriate. It actually wanted a fine and a transfer ban, and they thought that would be an appropriate sanction. The commission then heard both arguments and believed a financial penalty for a club that enjoys the support of a wealthy owner is not a sufficient penalty. I think the commission hasn't taken into account here that we don't really have a financial owner at the moment. You know, the club is in the due diligence stage of being taken over. So Mr. Moshiri is not going to be pumping a huge amount of money into the club when fees are agreed to be taken over by 777. The Commission agreed with the Premier League that the requirements of punishment, deterrence, vindication of compliance clubs, and the protection of the integrity of the sport demanding a sporting sanction in the form of a points deduction. This issue is not a form of sanction, but its extent. It goes on to say the size of the points deduction is to be determined by Everton's culpability. There's no fixed formula to be applied. It's at the discretion of the specialist panel, and a determination is to be made based on all facts of the case. Everton's PSR difficulties are not attributable to the cost of the stadium development because they're excluded. The cause of Everton's PSR difficulties was the fact that it overspent largely on its purchase of new players and its inability to sell other players. And because it finished lower in the league than it had projected, in the financial year 2022, we finished 16th against the projected 6th, causing a loss of expected income of 21 million. Everton's understandable desire to improve its on-pitch performance to replace the non-existent midfield, as Mr. Moshiri put in the evidence, led it to take chances with its PSR position. Those chances resulted in it exceeding the 105 million threshold by 19.5 million. The position that Everton finds itself is of its own making. It is Everton's responsibility to ensure that it complies with the PSR regime. 1.139. This was a serious breach that requires a significant penalty. The Commission considers that it should order an immediate deduction of 10 points. The Commission directs that Everton shall be subject to an immediate deduction of 10 points. We invite the parties to attempt to agree any consequential orders, and then it goes on about reviews, and it's signed off on page 41. So there we have it. Everton have been deducted 10 points by the Independent Commission. The Independent Commission then reviewed a whole host of mitigating factors within the hearing regarding transfers, regarding COVID, regarding Gylfi Sigurdsson, regarding COVID, the Ukraine war, the stadium costs. All points fell flat, and the Independent Commission sided with the Premier League and decided that Everton were guilty of overspend by £19.5 million. And for that £19.5 million, Everton have been deducted 10 points from the Premier League. As we now sit, I just wanted to get some reaction on Twitter about this, about these deductions. I think it goes to how Evertonians are feeling at the moment. Let's take a look at some posts that I liked earlier. First and foremost, I think it's interesting to get the opinion of Jamie Carragher. Jamie Carragher, of course, lifelong Blue fan, and he's put the 10-point deduction. Jamie Carragher has wrote on Twitter, the 10-point deduction for Everton is excessive and not right, considering they've been working with the Premier League about this for the last couple of years. Would it have been better to be evasive and try to drag it out like other clubs? No doubt, relegated clubs will have put big pressure on the Premier League to deal with Everton. But when you consider 6 clubs tried to leave the Premier League and there was no sanction at all, it doesn't feel right. Until other clubs are sanctioned, Everton will feel they are being used to show there is no need for an independent regulator, and they are right. Jamie Carragher, really big defence of Everton Football Club here. It's interesting that pundits already have come out and are saying 10 points it's a huge sanction and it's just too much. The Independent Commission have got this wrong. Nice one, Cara. Interestingly, we go to the Premier League standings. This has been put up by TalkSport. TalkSport have tweeted, Everton are now in big trouble. This is the Premier League standings as they are this afternoon. So as we can see, 10 points have been deducted from Everton's total. That means we're on 4 points. We're level on points with Burnley. Now, if you speak to people out in the open, you say who's going to get relegated, they say Burnley straight away. We are playing much better than Burnley at the minute. You know, we've got a higher points ratio in terms of results versus games played. But the bottom three are Sheffield United, Everton and Burnley. We are 2 points away from being on level with Luton on 17 points. One win essentially could get us out of the relegation zone. It's a horrendous place to be in. No Evertonian thought after 12 games of the Premier League they'd be sat on 4 points. Not just no Evertonian, no Burnley fan, no Sheffield United fan, no Luton fan, no Bournemouth fan. You can only imagine how their fans are feeling right now. They are going to be ecstatic. There's another team being dragged into the relegation fight for this year. The one thing that I do know, Everton will not go down without a fight. Ollie on Twitter there, I've just been putting a few tweets up. Hopefully you can see that. Ollie, siege mentality. Fucking Everton, aren't we? Well played, Ollie. Because we are, and no doubt we are going to be, the Evertonians are going to rally around the club now. And interesting. Roger Mottram has said, remove all Premier League logos, don't play the shitty anthem, don't talk to the press, just don't accept being treated like shit again. Made an example of, used as a tool in a rotten organisation's game. Just don't be fucking nice about this. Absolute raging. It'll be really interesting to see how Sean Dyche approaches this when he has his press conference before the Man U game. There's two approaches really, isn't there? Well, there's three. One that I probably believe he will take is to say Everton are really, it will toe the company line. Everton are shocked and disappointed by the Independent Commission's finding. They don't believe that the sanction is appropriate, and Everton have appealed, and we will make no further comment until the appeal has been heard. That is what Sean Dyche, I believe, will say. What he should say is, jog on. Paul Mason's got an interesting take. Top 6 won't be caught if teams can't spend money. It's interesting thought, isn't it? You know, is FFP appropriate for the Premier League? Should it be tiered at some stage? So the bottom teams or the teams below in the bottom half of the Premier League can spend more if they wish, to give them that sporting advantage to see if they can leapfrog a place or two and be able to challenge towards the top of the Premier League. Interesting from Merson there. Let's just take a look. Biggie Malls 2.0 are saying, if Everton get 10 points deducted for one charge, then surely these should be Man City's first 7 Premier League fixtures next season.
Reading, Aldershot, Bracknell, Didcot, Yateley, Winnersh, Taplow, Reading, Aldershot, Bracknell.
Absolutely, mate. Couldn't have said it better myself. Bit of Brent there. Let's see what else we have. Some initial reaction to it as well. This was one point A. Dempsey's put up regarding a point that Simon Jordan made on this. Whether Everton that could subsequently be sued by clubs that have already been relegated. Simon Jordan made the quote that everyone signs up to a covenant, which is basically that the sanctioning of a breach has these consequences. Now they can make a case if they want and try and make a case through the legal system to try and suggest that this is a breach of the rules people signed up to those rules. Any decent court case is going to refer them back to the industry they came from and say, what were the rules that you signed up to? Essentially, if anyone tries to sue Everton, Simon Jordan believes in a court of law, they'll simply refer them back to the Premier League and the Independent Commission and say that's what that's set in place for, so get on with it. Looking at some more reaction, Peach has tweeted at PollyJoe12, next week, no pyro inside Goodison Park, no pitch runners, no lashing stuff on the pitch, they're waiting for it. So he's basically saying, if we breach anything now, if there's a kid running onto the pitch wanting Beto's shirt, the Premier League are going to come down on us because it's us against them now. So don't give them anything. Let's have a look. At El Lisa EFC, I've said 9-point deduction if you go into administration. Make this shit make sense, please. It makes no fucking sense. Royal Blue Mersey, hell hath no fury like a fan base scorned. And I couldn't agree more. Just scrolling through Twitter, you get a feeling of what the Evertonians are saying, and absolutely every single one, and not only Evertonians, by the way, football fans from across the Premier League that I've seen on social media, pundits like Jamie Carragher have all come out to defend Everton. Fair play to them, because we are going to need some defending. I think it's a wholly inappropriate charge. 10 points is far too much. As you can see in this stat here, has been put on by at EFC_stato, by the way. These are some of the sanctions that have been set in place over the period of the top flight. And we've got Manchester United and Arsenal for a brawl, deducted 3 points in total, 2 for Arsenal, 1 for Manchester United. Sunderland in 1890 fielding an unregistered player, 2 points. Middlesbrough in 1996-97 failing to fulfil an actual fixture, 3 points. Portsmouth entering administration, and any team to enter administration, 9 points. Everton overspending by 19.5 million, 10 points. The biggest point reduction English top flight history, in Premier League history. I still can't quite wrap my head around it. Please do comment and leave some comments on YouTube. What do you feel about it? How are you feeling right now? What does it make you feel? Are the Premier League and the Independent Commission punishing the board? Are they punishing the directors of Everton Football Club? Or are they punishing the fans? They're punishing the local economy. If Everton, happen to get relegated, what will happen to people's jobs, to the economy around Goodison Park, to people's livelihoods, to the fans going to the match, the mental health? The Independent Commission, I think, have made a really, really poor decision. And we're going to see this play out over the coming days and weeks. Thank you for watching Restricted Views on YouTube. Please do follow us on social media. We are at Restricted EFC. And we'll see you next time.